KwaVulinndlela, the place of the opener of the road. It is the home of Dr. Peter Becker in Bryanston, outside Johannesburg. Among Africans, he is known as Vulindlela, opener of the road. He has been responsible for opening many roads, roads that lead to enlightenment. He has opened the way for contact and discovery to the remote world of Southern Africa's tribal people. In his anthropological studies, he has been involved in a number of unusual events. Today, we'll bring another remarkable event into his life, because today, Peter Becker will play host to royalty. Zwelithini Goodwill Gabekuzulu, king of the Zulu nation. Eighth in the line of Zulu kings, beginning with the legendary Shaka. To his people, the king is known as Ingonyama, the lion, and today he has come to visit Vulindlela.
The foot legs.
It is not often that African royalty comes to Bryanston. So, what is the reason behind this unusual occasion? What is the relationship between these two men? A scholar and a royal head of state. Peter Becker's early research work brought him into contact with the young Ingonyama's father, the late King Cyprian Bekuzulu. They became friends, and the friendship developed into a close and enduring relationship. When King Cyprian died in 1968, Peter Becker was visited by a delegation of Zulu dignitaries and asked to accept the role as the future king's guardian. This was a token of goodwill in acknowledgement of the long and intimate bond between himself and the Zulu royal house. And so it was. On Thursday, the 29th of October 1969, Peter Becker was adopted as father guardian to the future king. An unusual honor for a white man to have bestowed upon him. Historically, an event somewhat unique. Ngonyama, the lion, and Vulindlela, opener of the road. A memorable day in the colorful life of a remarkable man. Apart from his academic background in African vernacular languages, history and indigenous cultures, Peter Becker has spent the greater part of his life among the tribal groups of southern Africa, studying virtually every aspect of their lifestyle. His photography reflects the many moods and faces of the people he has grown to know and understand. His research has not been confined to Africa. He and his cameras have traveled widely. To North America, the Indian Ocean Islands, and the Middle East. But the camera and notebook are not his only instruments for capturing time, people, and events. He also records images in his charcoals and paintings. To the world, he is perhaps best known as an author. His numerous books on African history, tribal life, and interesting accounts of his own travels and exciting experiences have been translated into many languages. But how did it all happen? What makes a man dedicate his life to the study of various peoples and their cultures?
I've been asked how it came about that I should have devoted so much of my adult life to the research and study of the peoples of Southern Africa, and also peoples abroad. Well, it all goes back to my childhood years. My father was an immigrant to this country and had bought what is part of Rivonia today and across the Yukskay River into Bryanston. And this was a farm between Johannesburg and Pretoria. And that is where I was born. Now, the circumstances of my birth could be summed up, I think, in the words of an old greybeard that lived on our farm. And he said to me one day, "Wena Mushiman, you little boy, you were a late lambing in the season." Now, what he really meant was that my parents were both well into middle age when I was born. And I believe this caused quite a surprise in the area. Everybody was surprised, apparently, except myself. Now, I had two brothers who were considerably older than I was. And therefore, my little age mates were African herd boys on the farm. And so from the very beginning, I learnt to speak English, which is my mother tongue, Afrikaans, Sindebele, which is very similar to Zulu, and more than a smattering of Southern Sotho. And thanks to my age mates, I found myself involved in many wonderful experiences. Now, very much like little Jim Hawkins of Treasure Island fame, who had a very special friend in Long John Silver, I too had a very special friend, and he was my boyhood hero. His name was Sipho Ncube. Now, old Ncube had a wonderful gift for storytelling, and his stories fell into two categories. They were historical stories and ghost stories. And they were always told in serial form, because Sipho loved suspense, and he certainly succeeded in keeping my age mates and me in suspense. The historical stories brought me into the lives of great people like Shaka, king of the Zulu, Mzilikazi, the conqueror and founder of the Matabele dynasty, Moshoeshoe, who is also known as Moshesh, founder of the Basotho nation, and the charismatic Mantatisi, queen of the Batlokwa, or wildcat people, who carved a path through central South Africa in the last century. Now, I found old Sipho's historical stories most interesting, but I found his ghost stories not only most interesting, but most terrifying. And I can see myself having to come home at nights from his huts, first through thorn trees, then through thatching grass, then through the orchards, and I was terrified of the dark. And on moonlit nights I was afraid of my own shadow, and I was afraid of the sounds of the night, the hooting of owls and the piping of hawks, and even the chirping and the croaking that came out of the bush. But when I look back now on those days, I believe unreservedly that no one inspired me more to make a study of the peoples of Southern Africa in adulthood than Sipho Ncube. And when I look back on my career as an author, I believe it shot root in that little kraal, beside that open hearth, where my age mates and I used to sit listening wide-eyed and open-mouthed, totally enchanted by old Sipho's superb gift for storytelling. And so that is how it came about. And it has remained fresh within me as if it were yesterday.
The tribes of Southern Africa, people among whom Peter Becker has been working for many years. A diversity of social patterns, religious beliefs, cultural legacies, the tribal identity. But what is the origin of these tribal groups? Where did they come from?
Since the beginning of the 19th century, much thought has been given by students of African cultures to the origin of the blacks of Southern Africa. Up until about the 1930s, they were thought to be in many ways similar, and yet very different and therefore racially distinct from the Negro peoples to the north, the inhabitants, say, of Nigeria, Ghana, or Sierra Leone. But modern-day research has dispelled this theory, establishing very definitely that far from being racially distinct, South African blacks are racially closely connected to the great galaxy of Negro peoples outside the Saharan complex. This leads us to ask if the great tribal groups as we know them in Southern Africa today have always inhabited these parts. Well, actually, they haven't. So where do they come from? Now, it is believed that a great movement away from the moist and hot equatorial regions to the more temperate south started taking place about 2,000 years ago. But this must not be conceived as a massive exodus, but rather as a gradual expansion to the south as a result of a growth in population. Because as each generation brought forth sons and daughters, marriageable sons and daughters, so families multiplied with the inevitable result that more land for tilling, planting, and also for herding had to be found. And so over the centuries, as the expansion southwards continued, the newcomers fanned out across the subcontinent of Africa, carefully selecting those parts which suited their needs best and the needs of their cattle. Now, this is why one great human stream moved down the east coast, another through the central regions of southern Africa, and another through the more northwesterly regions. And this is also why they tended to avoid the Transvaal and Orange Free State Highveld, which was open and flat and exposed and generally treeless and subject to extreme climatic conditions. By the 1770s, the van of the Xhosa-speaking peoples had moved right down southern Africa and had crossed the Great Fish River into what is to become known as the Eastern Cape Province. And there, for the very first time, they came into contact with white pioneer farmers and hunters.
Social contact. But contact has brought about change, gradually encroaching on the identity of tribal Africa.
Acculturation has been taking place in southern Africa for a long time. So we asked Chief Gacha Buthelezi for his opinion in regard to Zulu culture, and especially the changes in Zulu culture.
I think that their cultural links are the thing that has kept them together. I think that we are a very closely knit ethnic group, you know, Zulus as such. And I don't know, some people might think we're chauvinistic, but I don't think we are. I think that we owe this to the regimentation of the Zulu people during Shaka's time.
Dr. Patudi, when one thinks of the various traditional practices in the Leboa, both among the Pedi and other groups of this country, which have you seen disappear over the years?
I can't remember them all, but I think that one of the customs fast disappearing is the one of rain making. You know, in the old days, it was very popular belief that we could make rain, or at least some people could make rain.
Would you regard circumcision, for example, as a custom worthy of retaining?
Yes, I should qualify this. I think for health reasons, I would recommend it. But only for health reasons. The other things that go along with it could easily be substituted, that the teaching, the instruction connected with these initiation ceremonies could be provided in the school system, I mean also in the church and so forth. I'm thinking of teaching the youngsters obedience, obedience to authority, being honest and being truthful and things like that. And being useful citizen as you take your place in the adult community. These are the lessons or instruction courses which can be provided for in the church as well as in the school system.
Would you think that circumcision as part of the initiation is likely to die out?
This, I think, is my guess. My guess is as good as anybody else. I am not so sure, but having regard to industrialization, urbanization, commercialization, and sophistication of the people, one feels that in due course of time, the blacks will be too busy involved in their own way of life that they'll not find time to go to the initiation ceremonies unless they go to the hospitals for the purpose. So I think one can't rule out the possibility that the initiation ceremonies will, I don't know, they will have to be modified. I wouldn't say they'll entirely die out.
Paramount Chief Sabata, I've been working in your country for many, many years. And in recent years, I've seen many changes here. Would you say there have been many changes in the customs of your people?
Oh, yes, Doctor. And so I'll start with one, that of circumcision. You know, we used to take our boys to the mountains and circumcise them there. And then after some time, say about after a month or so, they are brought back to their homes.
Yes.
But nowadays, these boys are taken to the doctors in town and they are circumcised there.
At Mthatha.
At Mthatha. And that's not according to our custom.
And what about weddings? Have they changed much?
Yes, these weddings have changed too, because we used to when taking a girl to her kraal, we used to drive a beast.
Yes.
And that was called Uduli. Uduli, that's right. But now there's that one called Gadala. So nothing is driven by the girl to her kraal.
Yes.
Because when they get there, they must slaughter this beast from her home, and then there's going to be another beast slaughtered there.
And what do you personally feel about these changes?
Yes, Dr. Berger, I do appreciate these changes because we can't be backward. We want to get the Western civilization too.
Yeah.
But what I don't like is that we must forget our customs. Yeah. Even if we go to school or we are educated, but we must not forget our customs.
Yeah.
A reciprocal visit. Vulindlela visits the Ingonyama in KwaZulu. This is Dlamahlahla, one of King Zwelithini's 3 royal homes near Nongoma. Originally, this was the official residence of King Solomon Mapumzana, grandfather of the present king. An opportunity for the two men to talk, to communicate and consult with each other, to reminisce, and to exchange thoughts that are important to the young king and his father guardian. More images, experiences, and memories. Vulindlela, opener of the road. And for Peter Becker, the road is a never-ending one, always leading to new horizons.
My researches among the peoples of Southern Africa date back to 1953, and it took some 20 years to cover all the tribal groups of Southern Africa from the Cape to the Zambezi and from the East Coast to the Atlantic. And this has also meant having to record in writing, in sound and photographically, a rather large spectrum of subjects. Now, among these subjects are those as mundane as dress and ornamentation, hut designs and the format of kraals and villages, means of subsistence, dietary patterns, indigenous medicines and medical practices, all forms of recreation, ancient and modern, games, dancing, singing, music, and musical instruments. And there have been the spiritual concepts and the many rituals and ceremonies, and also the study of kinship ties, and indeed a host of attitudes and aspirations and activities. In between all these excursions, all the traveling back and forth over and over again to far off places, have been regular visits to black residential areas on the outskirts of towns and cities. And the challenge has been not only to assess, but also to keep abreast with cultural change as influenced by urbanization. And so the study continues. There can be no other way.